President-elect Trump continues to take a friendly posture towards Russia and its leadership. Our team caught up with Bloomberg editor-in-chief Jan Micklethwait and, given everything that's been happening over these past few months, asked him to reflect on his interview with the Russian President Vladimir Putin last September.
What's interesting about that interview looking back is that Putin it started a fight with Hillary.
Does it even matter who hacked this data from the campaign headquarters of Mrs. Clinton? The important thing is the content that was given to the public, specifically that the campaign headquarters worked in the interests of one of the candidates, in this case Mrs. Clinton, rather than equally for all of the Democratic Party candidates.
Hillary immediately reacted to what Putin said about her in the interview, and then Trump criticized Hillary, and then another round of Putin went through. I think the really interesting question is, who did Putin really deep down want to win? I think he wanted Trump to win from the perspective of just showing that he had influence, showing that he was able to do things and that this was his guy. But at least part of him on the international stage, I think, would have been happier with Hillary. Putin, I think, genuinely always wants to be the guy who's going to be the surprise. And as we've already seen, or as we already expect to see, Trump is someone who could be the surpriser. You don't want to be outflanked as being the most exciting man at the party. And that, I think, Putin's advantage has always been that he's been less predictable than other people. Well, if you have the most powerful man in the world being one of the least predictable, that makes it harder for him in some ways. I think the ideal solution for Putin was a weak Hillary presidency, in some ways at least. But against that, that's what I thought at the time. You now look at all the publicity and all the things that he has gained from what has happened. I mean, Putin now stands there, a very kind of big figure in American politics, and that really matters a lot to him. It's really rather astounding if you look back at it. Putin was someone who was a slightly kind of joke figure only 3 or 4 years ago. Now suddenly he's back in the front rank. You know, the world's most powerful nation seems to be keen on having a slightly friendlier relationship with him. Several European countries are making the same noise. You know, he's back in the ranks again, and that does make a difference. Obama was very dismissive about Putin. He pointed out that he was running Russia's economy badly, that essentially Russia was a second-rate power. And that's true. You know, Russia is no longer at the same level of power as America, but what Putin's shown is it's possible to do quite a lot in that second-rate league. What Trump has done is Trump has built him up. He's talked about him being a great leader. These are all things which help Putin on both scales. They help Putin away from home, because suddenly Putin is seen as a man to be reckoned in the Middle East, man to be talked to in different places. That he quite likes. But also at home, the idea of Putin still as, you know, a czar is a cliched way to look at it, but that is the way that, you know, Russians are very obviously, for good and bad reasons, drawn towards strong leaders. And the fact that Trump keeps on saying these nice things about Putin, which even the Russians know is not necessarily the world's nicest man, that makes them think that Putin is smarter than Trump, because, hell, he'll outwit him every stage of the game.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people.
I think we'll never know what damage Putin did to the US democratic process. You know, Donald Trump won by a reasonable margin in quite a lot of states, and that we'll never know. The issue of hacking will stay for quite some time, because basically cybersecurity, all these things are zones of problem, to be honest, between Russia and America. A lot will depend on whether Russia continues to do this stuff now Donald Trump is president, because it's pretty clear they have been doing stuff. The other issue, very strongly in the background, is China. You know, China, there seems, we have no evidence of this, there seems to be a kind of deal done where with Obama at least, the Chinese stop doing things. Well, Donald Trump is being nice to Russia and horrible to China. The chances surely are that the Chinese will be more aggressive in that particular field than they've been before, and that could have consequences. That's one set of issues. Another set of issues is just basically the fact that Donald Trump is now in charge of American security. And if you get told by your security people, look, this is what's happening, and most of the instances, it's relatively, as I understand it, relatively easy to indicate where at least some of these things are starting. If they are consistently starting in Russia, then he will have to deal with that. I think there is some element of credibility in the idea that this is what countries do. You know, very obviously, America does it as well. And I think actually there is some justifiable indignance from the Chinese in particular, is that they get slightly fed up with the idea of the Americans lecturing them about cybersecurity when they know that probably the most, you know, one of the main users of this albeit not quite in the same commercial way as both China and Russia seem to have done it, has been America. And it makes sense. This is an arms race. America is the most powerful country in the world. If you were president, you would want to have the best cybersecurity, and that is a mixture between offense and defense. And even if you claim you're trying to do defense the whole time, the ability to go and see what's happening inside the Kremlin, see what's happening inside Beijing, that is worth a great deal. It's very difficult to work out what exactly the real contacts, such as they are, between Trump and Russia. As far as I can make out, and I'm not an expert in this, is that Donald Trump's business interests in Russia are fairly minimal. To some extent, he exaggerated things like his contacts with Putin when he was merely running a Miss World pageant, or whatever. It was a beauty pageant in Russia. He's not, as far as anyone can see from the outside, sort of deeply involved in Russia from a business point of view. So I think that is a kind of canard which people have probably leveled at him too much.
I don't know that I'm going to get along with Vladimir Putin. I hope I do, but there's a good chance I won't. And if I don't, do you honestly believe that Hillary would be tougher on Putin than me? Does anybody in this room really believe that?
At this precise moment, Donald Trump is a very useful friend for Vladimir Putin to have. Here is some cover. He has spent a long time telling people that he is not against the West at all, that he is he is not trying to establish the old Soviet Union or do anything like this. Well, he now has a president in America who is somehow at least prepared to go along with some of that and say, look, no, this is a stand-up guy in a sense. If you look at Trump and Putin, there has to be some sense in which this honeymoon is, at the very least, it's not going to be as happy a marriage as the honeymoon. You would expect just the sheer problem of national interest to begin to emerge. At the moment, Russia's interests and America's interests, even America's interest as redefined by Donald Trump, would seem to be in too great a contradiction. And there are also problems on top of it. At the moment, it has suited Donald Trump to point out that Putin has been running rings around Obama in different areas. Now he will be the president. And when people look at the Middle East, they're going to say, look, you're president of America, what are you doing about it? If it looks as if Russia is actually running that will begin to challenge the Trump authority. If it looks as if Russia is doing cyber warfare, different versions of that on America, that again is challenging Donald Trump's authority. If he pushes Trump on, say, the Baltics, at the moment, some people around Trump talk about the Baltics being like the suburbs of St. Petersburg. These are members of NATO. There is some precedent for this, even with people who we now associate as much more kind of heroic people. You look at Margaret Thatcher, she was suddenly hit by this thing in the Falklands, these strange islands many, many miles away, and it was only when she suddenly realised how crucial this was, not just to Britain, or whether it was crucial to Britain or not, it's a long argument, but it was certainly crucial to her political reputation. People don't like an American president who appears weak. Well, if Trump ends up in a position where it looks as if Putin is consistently outsmarting him, that is not going to be in Donald Trump's interest. Syria is the place where Putin's sort of ability to be able to operate in a vacuum of American power, this is the place, this is exhibit A of what he's managed to do. And he has done something, whether one agrees with it or not. He's managed to keep Assad in power. He's sort of, actually, it seems as far as one can work out, he is kept Assad in power for much longer than anyone ever expected. It looks like Assad will stay in power. Well, now Donald Trump is in effect the American president, and he has said repeatedly that he doesn't want to get involved in these things, but whether he likes it or not, America is de facto involved in this. America is the world's policeman, and you either have to turn a blind eye to what is happening in Syria, or else you feel ashamed about it. And I think even Donald Trump will find it difficult to turn back on some of the things which are happening in Syria because they're horrible. I think the interesting question to ask Putin now is, how do you play Trump? You may not get a very straight answer, but the basic question is, how do you do it? You have somehow, and I'm sure Putin is just as surprised by his success in doing this. That he's managed to have some effect. We don't know what it was on the American election. He's managed to become somebody who the President of America talks about in the terms he talks about. He's become somebody who people talk about in the American political environment in a way they never did before. All those things have happened. And so Putin is now suddenly in a position which I don't think he ever expected to be in much the same way as you might argue Donald Trump is in a position he didn't possibly expect to be in. And so for Putin, the real question is, where do you take it from here? If you keep on doing the things you are doing around the world, you are going to have problems with America. If you stop doing those things, you may have some problems at home. And that's the balance for him. He has put himself back right at the center of American politics. No Russian leader has done that for a very, very long time.